Welcome to GoalPost. Now your host, Janelle Sam.
How many of you have reached that place in your professional career where, though you've made many achievements, wonder if you have plateaued or that you're just too old to redefine who you are? And in light of that, how many of you who are listening today would like to hear from the perspectives of someone with an incredible, an impressive career, and how he kept pace with the world as the world around him changed over 3 decades, actually almost 4 decades of experience? Welcome. And I thank you for joining me on the show tonight. And I know that you're in for another show where there's a lot to think about, reflect on, and hopefully this gives you what you're looking for in terms of defining who you are, regardless of how old you are. Over the next couple of hours, you're going to hear an engaging discussion about age as it pertains to our ability to reinvent ourselves. Many of us hold on to stories that by the time we reach a certain age, it is not possible to do much more than what we have already been doing in the past. Or we have fears that we are becoming less and less relevant in this very ever-changing world of evolving technology and social advances. In this space tonight, we will talk about what that looks like and how we can change our perspective on our life's trajectory. Today, I am joined by Kevin Mayer. He is not only one of my trusted friends, dear friends, but he's also a preeminent trial attorney. Kevin is a partner and senior trial attorney at Norton Rose Fulbright in LA, and he has litigated and tried many types of cases, such as product liability, toxic tort, environmental, and OSHA cases in multiple federal, state, territorial, and tribal courts, as well as before government agencies and administrative bodies. Kevin writes and lectures frequently on trial practice and expert witness opinion testimony. His exceptional skill in the courtroom is evidenced by his election as a senior fellow in the Litigation Council of America, the Trial Lawyers Honor Society. It's an honor. Kevin also counsels clients on regulatory and environmental health and safety issues in the workplace. And on the personal side, Kevin is a proud and doting father to 4 kids and is a hockey coach for the Los Angeles Kings Legends League, working with high school athletes. He and his wife of 22 years reside in the Pacific Palisades of California. Kevin, welcome. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Thanks so much. It's a real honor to be with you again, and thank you for chatting with me.
I am just so honored. Sometimes I look at some of the people who's in my life, right? And for anyone who's listening tonight, Kevin is just one of those individuals who's like a rock. He's had some calls from me over the time that we've, the length of time that we've known each other, rapping in tears, like, oh my God, I can't do. And, he shows up. He shows up. He shows up for the people that he cares for. And it's something that I truly admire, and I feel blessed, and I feel very, very, very lucky to know you in every capacity, as an attorney, as a friend, as an advisor. So I really am happy that you agreed to join me tonight.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity, and what I think about these sorts of things. I think we are all placed in each other's lives for specific reasons, and it's been certainly a blessing for me to have gotten to know you as a friend and as a client and as a trusted advisor in your own right. And so it's been a wonderful opportunity to get to know you and work with you over the course of time.
So for everyone listening, if you're listening to the show on allrealradio.com, or if you're listening to the airing of it as on a podcast, I highly advise go to YouTube and check out the video. Now, Kevin, for our listeners, you know, your voice, you come across, you're very articulate, sound of mind. And if anyone had to guess it, they'd peg you. I did, at least when I first met you, I pegged you decades younger than you actually are. Do you mind sharing how long you've been practicing law and what your age is?
Sure. I've been practicing now going on my 38th year in the profession, and I'm about to turn 63.
So the reason for my chuckle, you know, when he told me when we first met what his age was, I'm like, no, like I wanted, literally, I wanted him to give me his driver's license because I didn't believe it. You are in better shape. You have more drive than many 35-year-olds that I know. And this is something that I feel as though, you know, that requires a certain type of fortitude and mindset and approach to who you are as an individual. You didn't say, okay, I'm getting older, I'm just going to hang in the towel. So tell me, let's talk a little bit about what you do today. How often do you work out? What kind of workouts do you do? What kind of health regimen do you follow?
So currently I work out 6 or 7 times a week, usually in the morning at 6 a.m. And I'm doing something called F45, which is really a remarkable company. It started in Australia a number of years ago. It's come to the United States. It's other places in the world now. But these are in-studio workouts where every day is something different. One day it could be heavy aerobics, anaerobic power, strength, combinations. And most of the workouts are 45 minutes long. And then on Saturday, we usually have a 1-hour workout, which combines both strength and cardio work. And what I like about it is it doesn't put the sort of beating on me that I used to take when I was younger and could take the beating from really heavy lifting and a lot of strenuous running and the things I had to do when I was still playing. So now this is actually an ideal way to stay in shape and keep my youthful vigor.
So, okay, let's keep it honest here. For anyone who's listening, you're hearing Kevin say, well, I'm doing F45 because it doesn't give me the kind of beating that I used to have when I was younger. And that source, if you're not familiar with F45 and the type of workout that is, it kind of paints this picture, if you're not familiar with it, that, you know, when he says aerobics, he's in the pool doing water aerobics, right? And that if he's doing, you know, strength workout, it's because he's sitting on a bench and he's lifting 10-pound dumbbells, which is far from what F45 is. It's actually a very, very rigorous program. So you're doing this, you said 5-6 times a week?
Well, 6 or 7.
6 or 7, right? 6 or 7 times a week. And you're waking up at what time to get to these? Like, what time do you start your day?
So my day usually starts at about 4:45 a.m., usually with one of our dogs ringing the bell to go out. So I hop out of bed, take the dogs, put them outside, come back, put on my workout gear, go back to the kitchen, feed the dogs, make a cup of coffee, check the news, hop in the car, drive over to F45, do the workout, come back, have breakfast, take my high schooler to school, come back and shower and get to work.
Okay. So by the time you've woken up, taken care of the dogs, right? Have some breakfast, you know, leisurely, before you've made it to your workout. Most people are not even stirring. Now, I want to bring my listeners, everyone who's listening here today, I need to remind you, Kevin is about to turn 63. And these conversations, this is one of the reasons why I started this show, right? GoalPost, which is the mindsets, how you approach what you're doing. Now, in all fairness, Kevin, were you always somewhat in tune with your health and athletic?
Yes. I will say that very candidly. Being an athlete and being fit and in shape and having that appearance of an athlete who is in shape has always been a part of my identity. And it's an important part of my identity. It's how I carry myself. It's how I perceive myself. It's how others perceive me as well. But certainly going back to my days as a grade school athlete, and then a high school athlete, and then a college athlete, and then a semi-professional athlete in all the years that I was playing rugby, and even as a hockey coach, this is part of my identity. Obviously, being a lawyer is what I do. That's my profession. My avocation is to be an athlete, and it's just part of who I am.
Now, I want to kind of unpack that a little bit more. When you say being healthy is part of my identity. And this is something that I believe, as we get older, who you believe yourself to be, what you hold true to who you are, that has a tendency to change. And it can change in many instances for not good. Now, you've been an athlete when you were a young boy and a teen and a young man. And at what point do you remember when you made that decision to say, no, this is part of my identity? Because there are many people who play high school sports or who are into fitness, and then they go to college, and then, things kind of change, or maybe they even keep up with it somewhat because they play in college, and then life happens. You get married, you have kids, and that kind of tends to take a backseat where it's no longer part of the identity of who you are. Do you ever remembering any time in your life when you were like, I cannot stop this? Because you have 4 kids, right? And you are a trial attorney, which requires, a lot of your time, your effort, and when you're using your brain a lot, it could drain you physically. What made you keep on or hold on to fitness in the way you have over the years?
I suppose you could say at one level, it's a certain level of narcissism about your appearance. I have never been one to want to age gracefully, or frankly, to really age at all. Mm-hmm. And my wife and I joke about fighting the future as long as possible, because our life expectancy continues to lengthen over the course of time. And if you're going to be on this earth for a long period of time, you want to be functional. You want to be vital. You want to be out there doing things and capable of doing things and not held back by physical or mental or emotional restriction. And so it's just something that drives me. In this profession of being a lawyer, we spend an awful lot of time sitting at our desk, sitting at a computer, whether you're at the office or at home or in the courthouse or what have you, you can turn into a very sedentary individual, in addition to all the stress that the profession places on you. And it can really affect you physically and emotionally and mentally over the course of time if you let it. So some people handle that by drinking. Some people handle that by drugs. Some people handle that by running. Some people handle that by physical fitness. I've chosen the latter as my escape. And not really so much of an escape or a coping mechanism, but just as a way of life, because it's important to me. It's important to how I perceive myself. It's important to my own mental well-being. And so this is why I do it.
So you asked me earlier. So I've been working out. I think I've only recently committed to taking health and the health of my being and taking it by the horns. And I've been working out very regularly 4 or 5 times a week. And today you asked me, you said, did you go to the gym today? Because we talk frequently, so you kind of know what I do. And I'm like, no. Because typically I would go to the gym. I'm like, well, no, I had so much, to do at work. It's a long day. And after the show, I'm probably not going to have the energy because I started so early and it's been a lot of meetings back to back. And by the time we're done, with the show, it's going to be pretty late. And so I didn't think I'd have the energy. So I'm curious, in your mind, what were you thinking when I said that?
Well, I was thinking, how sad for you, because I know how important that has become for you. We've talked about this, and you're transforming your physical appearance, and you're happy with how that's going, and it's important to you, and it's driving you, it's motivating you, it's making you want to do it more because you like the results, you like the way you feel, you like the way you look, you like the way that it affects your mental well-being and your outlook on things. And so it's becoming more and more important to you. And so when we have that taken away from us because we happen to be too busy on a day, or maybe we find ourselves on an airplane, or you're having a day like today where it's back to back to back phone calls and you can't get to it, that's just unfortunate. And the good news is there's always tomorrow. You'll always be able to get back to it.
What do you do when you have like crazy days? I'm like, I have to, I admitted it. I'm just gonna be too tired to go. Right. And what would you have done?
Well, I'll give you an example. So last Wednesday, I was traveling back to Los Angeles from meetings that I had been at for several days in Atlanta. And just based on the schedule, I was actually hoping to work out before I left the hotel. And I asked the guy if I could get a late checkout. And he said, nope, sorry, I can't do that. So my purpose in asking him that was I could go get a workout during the lunch hour before I went to the airport, but I wasn't able to do it. And so I knew I was going to miss that day. And that's just how it goes. I had not had a day off from working out in 3 weeks. And so, okay, fine, I'll take a day off. And that's just
in
how
3 weeks. So I just want to put context into the difference in the mindset. Kevin is 62, almost 63. I am interviewing him and I am speaking to him, and I am only, and I'm going to put that in air quotes, I am only 45 years old. And I cannot sit here and say that I've taken, a day off from working out. Like I'll go 4 times a week, but I will have those moments where I'm like, okay, I don't feel like it. And what I wonder is if, because for you, it's part of your identity, that there is something that happens in you if you could not do this, you could not exercise for, I wonder if there's a cap in how long you can go without exercising, which might just be 24 hours before you like, I have to be in the gym, or I have to be doing my routine if I'm in a hotel room. And what that takes, because for you to hold on into doing this, right, for when you were in your 30s, and then when you're in your 40s, and you didn't stop when you're in your 50s, you're in your 60s, and you show zero sign of ever slowing down or stopping unless, you probably something happened to you physically. And even then, it sounds like you might find a way to move whatever working part of your body you can.
I'll tell you a funny story about that. When I was probably 32 years old, and I was in the middle of my rugby career, I hit a guy who's much, much bigger than me, and it actually drove my elbow through my side, and I severed a portion of my kidney. And so I ended up driving myself to the hospital after the game, and you can imagine what it feels like to have an organ torn apart. I didn't know.
No, I cannot. I don't know how many of our listeners can.
But I got in there, and I was hospitalized for 3 days while they waited for me to stop bleeding. And they said, normally we just see this sort of an injury in a car accident. I said, well, that's kind of how it felt at the time. But as soon as I got discharged from the hospital, I drove back home, and my mother came over to see how I was and make sure I was okay. I said, Mom, I think I'm going to go out and take a walk. And I went out and took a walk down to the gym and lifted. And took it easy, didn't kill myself, just let pain be my guide. But that's how it was, because I hadn't done anything for 3 days. And so it's time to start getting ready to get back into it.
I feel as though that what you've just described in that experience of getting hurt didn't stop you from holding on to it, didn't change your identity, because it could have. You could have said, I need to heal. So I need to just let my body do what it needs to do. And I don't want anyone who's, especially if you're a physician, saying, we're putting some bad advice here. It's not advice. We're talking specifically about the mindset that Kevin has about his identity when it comes to his health and fitness, and how many of us struggle, in our 30s and in our 40s, and like we can't see ourselves being someone who holds this level of fortitude in saying, this is my identity, this is what I do, this is who I am, and so I'm not going to stop doing it because I'm too old.
Right. And here's the secret about this that people need to understand, in my opinion. I talk to people about this all the time. It's very easy to keep doing this as an adult when you laid the foundation for it when you were in high school or college. People that didn't do those things then have a much harder time coming to it as an adult and staying with it. But here's the secret. It doesn't take that long. And you need to have a place to go where you will be surrounded by others who are doing it as well, so you can take some motivation from them. If you try to put it all on yourself and you think, oh, gee, I've got to go over to the gym and I've got to work out for 2 hours and so forth, you're setting yourself up for failure because you're putting undue expectations on yourself. You don't need that kind of time. Heck, you can walk into a gym and get a very thorough full body workout done in 20 minutes if you apply yourself. And that's really all it takes. When we do F45, it's 45 minutes for the total workout from the time we are introduced to the day's workout to the time we're done. And in there, you're going to do anywhere from 25 to 28 minutes of actual hard work. And it is hard work. But the good news is you're surrounded by other people. You're on the clock. So you have no choice but to go, go, go. And it's remarkable how much you can accomplish in a fairly brief period of time if you come with the right attitude and are ready to go.
So would you say an element of this is accountability? Because if you're showing up where you said you have to have somewhere to go, right? Is it going to a gym where it's a group class? Is it going to the gym where you're working with a trainer? Or is it just, whether it's a gym or a trainer or a partner or a friend, is there an accountability piece that helps you stick with that decision to do something that is going to become part of your identity, or you've chosen that it is already part of your identity and you want it to remain that way?
It's really sort of a chicken and egg issue, isn't it? I think accountability is a very good word for it because it's something that has to come from within. You have to hold yourself accountable for these things. The reason I like to have some place to go is because I'll work out at home, but I can't do that consistently. I need to be in an atmosphere. I need to have a place to go where I know I'm going there for a specific purpose. And the specific purpose is to work out. I go other places for specific purposes. When you're at home, it's too easy to get distracted. People buy all this equipment. They think, oh, I'm going to start working out at home. And that lasts for about 2 weeks and they start falling away from it. And pretty soon they're not doing it anymore. And now you have a piece of expensive equipment gathering dust in the corner. So that's why I'm a firm believer that you have to go someplace else, because it gives you something to look forward to. You've got a destination that you're going to and a specific purpose that you're there to accomplish.
Well, this is, so for you, right, as this attorney who is in incredible shape, who no one believes your age, right? The fact that you've held on to this identity, this part of yourself as part of your identity, because it's not all of who you are, right? It's just one part of it. This is something where I think that as anyone, if anyone is listening, this might just be a conversation right now. We're going to be covering some other topics during the course of the next couple, I think an hour and a half, that who you are is a choice. It's what you choose to do, because once you've made the choice and you've made the decision that this is part of who I am, that you'll find a way to make sure that you stick with it, whether it's exercising, whether it's going back to school, whether it's learning a new language, that you are, if you want part of your identity to be bilingual. Now, we're not covering all of that, but I think that once we come back from the break, we're going to delve in a little bit more into what Kevin has experienced in the last 38 years. Like, what did the world of law look like for him when he was 35? what does it look like today, and what some of those challenges were that he faced back then, how that's changed today, and how he's managed to stay, present and relevant over the course of almost 4 decades. So when we come back from the break, we're going to get into that. There's so much more that we're looking forward to discuss. So I'm talking with Kevin Mayer, one of my dear friends, and a senior trial attorney and partner at Norton Rose Fulbright. And just before the break, we were talking about the fact that at 62 years of age, almost 63, that Kevin has probably one of the most impressive or most rigorous exercise routine that allows him to remain fit, nimble. He coaches hockey. He's a hockey coach. He's on the ice. He is keeping up with the best of them. And, he hasn't let his age be a factor in determining what his health ability is going to be or his fitness level is going to be. And so we want to, take a step back and talk about the fact that, okay, you are a trial attorney. When did you make the decision to become an attorney? And what was the influence like for you in that 40 years ago, 38 years ago?
Well, the influence was pretty simple. My father was an attorney. It's a very long story, and I'll sort of give you the executive summary of it. My father was born in 1917, grew up during the Depression, lost his father when he was 15. In those days, you only had to go to college for 2 years as an undergrad before you went to grad school. So he went to the University of California at Berkeley for 2 years, right into the University of California, Hastings College of the Law in San Francisco for 3 years. Graduated at the top of his class in 1941, and boom, Pearl Harbor occurs. So he goes right into the service. He went into the United States Army Air Force as an officer candidate. As a matter of fact, an interesting bit of trivia, his commanding officer in officer candidate school in Miami Beach in 1942 was Clark Gable.
No, really?
Some of you may recognize as one of the leading Hollywood actors,
yes,
really of all time, but certainly of that age. So
do you have any pictures? If you've got any pictures, we'll add it into the video. So of your dad.
I do have my father's military portrait here in my office.
But any with Clark Gable, because that's what we want to see. No, okay.
Nothing with Colonel Gable. So he was in for the duration, comes out, goes to work for the Court of Appeal as a clerk, and then into the San Francisco District Attorney's Office, interestingly under the original Governor Jerry Brown, who at that time was the DA of San Francisco, Edmund G. Brown Sr. He spent 22 years in the DA's office, and then in 1969 was appointed by Governor Ronald Reagan to the San Francisco Superior Court bench, where he spent the next 17 years as a trial judge in various assignments on that bench. Now, I grew up in the 1960s, and of course, what was the hallmark of the 1960s? Well, there were several. We had the space program, where we literally went from 0 to the moon in 9 years. And my first dream as a little boy was, I want to be an astronaut. The right stuff. And right. If any of your listeners have not seen that movie, I strongly encourage them to see it, because that really encapsulates perfectly what the space program was all about in those days. And then I shifted my attention to wanting to be a quarterback in the NFL. That was my dream. And I grew up, of course, watching John Brody with the San Francisco 49ers, and just learned the game by watching all the great NFL quarterbacks playing on television, because we didn't have clinics or private coaching or anything like that in those days. And unfortunately, along my way to the NFL, two things happened. I stopped growing, and I didn't throw well enough. So that took care of that.
When you say stop growing, your height, like there was a height requirement. Right, is that right. What that is?
Okay. I'm 5'10", and okay. There are not too many 5'10" quarterbacks playing anywhere, much less the NFL. So that took care of that issue. So then I decided, as I got to college, and I had walked on as a football player, and I started playing rugby in college. it was clear that I was going to head toward law as the oldest of my father and mother's three children.
Well, was that
So-
1 second there? Hold on. Was that like the expectation? Was it that your dad was like, son, I'm a respectable judge in the community, and you're my son, and there's no higher profession than being an attorney. Like, what was that conversation? Because you just said there was the expectation as the eldest son that you were going to go into law.
Well, no, it really wasn't an expectation. He never put that kind of pressure on me, but it was better than the other career path I was entertaining in his view at the time, which was to go into the service. I was actually going to go into the Air Force to be a fighter pilot. And because he had lived that experience, he did not want me in the service. I think he was more afraid that I would make a career out of it, knowing my personality, knowing this image that I created for myself. And I don't think that's what he saw. And it would have been a peacetime military as well at that time. It was in the early 1980s. So his view was, you're going to end up flying a desk. You're going to delay getting involved in your ultimate career. So you may as well put that aside. And so I let him talk me out of the service and ended up going into law school after I graduated undergrad with a degree in political science. Now, when I started the practice in 1985, I was with a very old and well-established trial firm in San Francisco. And at that time, the biggest law firms in the country were only 250, maybe 300 attorneys. That was considered a very large law firm. And it was right about the time that I got out of school and went into the practice that the whole concept of big law that we know today was born. And we started seeing the creation of these larger and larger firms. The firm I work for today is about 3,000 attorneys all over the world.
So, wait, so before you continue, I may interrupt you a few times here. When you started working, in law, when you entered, and it, what was defined as large back then was only 200 to 300. Today, we're talking about thousands of employees around the world, because now they're global. But when you joined, what was that environment like? Was there, and the time period, because I want to talk about this, because what that was like is not what it is today. And you have gone through, you have seen, you've borne witness to the change in that ecosystem, right? And you've experienced, right? You yourself, your identity doesn't change. The world changes around you. So when you went into this law firm, this big law firm, you're now this young, hotshot attorney, fresh from law school. And for anyone who's looking at Kevin, and I'm going to describe him, I'm going to describe the physical features as I see it today, because I didn't know him when he was in his 30s. But, Kevin's got the most brilliant blue eyes, the all-American look, very, very athletic build. His character, his stature, when he carries himself, it's one that is very, very confident. It's not cocky. It's just someone who's sure of himself. Very attractive features. And so when you walk into this firm, you're this attractive young attorney, blonde hair, blue eyes, that like really the stereotypical golden child, all-American boy, right? Not that you were a boy then. And with a father who's a judge. What was that world like when you were in your 30s in the law firms?
Well,
when it was only 200.
I was actually in my mid-20s.
Mid-20s,
when I
okay.
started practicing, I was 25 years old.
Okay.
Literally just turning 25. And so, first of all, it's very nice of you to be so complimentary. I appreciate that greatly. I don't think I deserve it. But when I came into that environment in San Francisco, where my father had been a sitting judge for a long time and was well known to all of the trial attorneys in that firm, it was clearly a benefit, because it was sort of I guess considered a plum opportunity to get me as an associate there. And I'm very pleased that I made that decision to go with that firm. In those days, when you went into a law firm, the expectation was that that's where you would spend your entire career. And indeed, that was my intention when I went there. Most of the senior trial attorneys in that firm had come up from the time they came out of law school right up to their date of retirement, and they had been with that one law firm. And I fully expected to do the same.
And can I ask you a question about that?
Yes.
because the times have changed since then. When you were working where there were these legacy attorneys, meaning once they got it, they had it, right? For life, if they chose to, unless they retired or quit. But that didn't happen very often, right? Because it's a very different world today. If you stay 5 years, that's actually considered tenure. But back then, you joined a firm, you stayed, right? So you're talking about people who've had 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years of working with any particular law firm, especially the larger, more established ones. Were there a lot of women? Were there people of color? What was that environment like?
Yes. When I came to my first firm, we were at that time about 185 attorneys. Probably half of those attorneys were women. We had quite a number of, to use your term, attorneys of color, so Black, Hispanic, Asian. Just how it was. I mean, nobody really thought much of it. It just was the way the firm was. And as I say, a lot of people had been there upwards of 30 and 40 years. And it was a great environment. It was somewhat of a reputation of a jock firm. A lot of the attorneys that were there had been athletes in college and beyond. I think you find that actually among a lot of trial attorneys, just because of their competitive nature. They tend to become trial attorneys as opposed to be engaged in some other part of the profession. So things weren't, I don't think, that different on a macro scale from maybe what we saw over the succeeding decades. Obviously, the way in which people interrelated with one another changed, and we can talk about that. But generally speaking, if you took the firm I started with and multiplied that by 10, you would have the firm I'm at now.
Well, and I ask that because in litigation, it's at least with the big law firms, and there's been so much publicity around it as well, where there's not been as many efforts for diversity. Not that they didn't have anybody who was minority or woman or other, and there just isn't, there's just not the percentages, not as many in the senior positions and the decision-making positions, or where there's ownership in the firm. Now that's today, at least in my time. So if the firm that you were in, and I ask this because I just want to get a picture of how that landscape changed, because for you, you've been in the firm through all the changes. And when I say the firm, I don't mean one firm, because you've worked at some of the most prestigious firms across your career. So, but you've been in the top law firms where, regardless of where you were, there was a consensus of the industry as a whole of not being very diverse. And then now that changing. And so that means that where you are today and what you have today may not necessarily have been as reflected almost 40 years ago when you started. Mm-hmm. And if so, right, how has that really changed your experience and how, your interactions and defining as to who you are when you come in as, the all-star, all-round player, rugby career, you've got it all working for you. And then a lot of the other partners or the other senior trial attorneys were probably mostly men and probably very similarly qualified with a similar type of experience in terms of playing sports, being this kind of an all-American. And then as that changed, where it's not as many jocks, it's not as many men, it's more women. It's not as many the all-American, because all-American always kind of referred to, the white American, blonde, blue-eyed, right? Not necessarily to the person who's of Asian descent or the person of color or the person of East Asian descent. That's not really what was referred to. So you didn't change that landscape. That landscape changed around you. You didn't create it. You didn't start it. You entered it. And how did that change, or how did that affect, who your role in this place? Like, how have things changed? And you've gotten older in an industry, right, that, with evolving technology and, everyone's trying to make a statement that, that's going to affect who you are. But yet 38 years later, here you are still this amazing attorney, still working with your clients, still adding value. And I'd really like to hear about that story of how it's changed and how you've changed with it, and what you've
Sure.
experienced, and what your honest, feelings are about what has transpired over the years.
So let's unpack that, because there's a lot.
There's a lot, yeah.
And you've actually said a number of things there that caused me to reflect back on what my first firm was like. And when I look at it, it was actually the exception to what a lot of firms were like in those days that actually met the criteria that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Principally, the older white males dominating the profession, very, very few women, very few minority attorneys, and so forth. That was certainly true in a lot of places. It was not true where I was, because just of the nature of the firm and the type of practice that it was. Indeed, when I made the decision to join that firm, part of it was I'd been a summer associate there during law school, so that of course helped because I already worked there. I was a known commodity. But also I had 3 of my rugby teammates on the team I was playing for at the time who were attorneys at that law firm. And they said, Kev, you got to come here. This is just a great place to be. And so that was really one of the principal motivating factors. I didn't engage in this really rigorous analysis of, gee, I should be looking at these 20 different law firms and figure out what's going to be the best to advance my career. Because this firm did the things that I wanted to do as a trial firm, and they also encouraged our rugby careers. I was able to play until I was 35 at that firm. There's no question if I had been at a different kind of firm, I would have had to retire much earlier than I did, because they would not have appreciated or respected that. They would have just focused strictly on the profession to the exclusion of all else. So I actually made the right decision. Now, from a social perspective, in the mid to late 1980s, it was a completely different time. In fact, if I can draw a comparison, if you've seen the television show Mad Men,
I've heard.
that would tend to describe a bit what the social dynamics were like in those days in the law firm environment, and not just law firms, any type of a professional organization. It was a lot more social, if I can use that word to describe it, than I think things are today. A lot more was tolerated. People were who they were. And, that doesn't necessarily make it right. It doesn't make bad conduct right. That's never appropriate. But I think people were a little more understanding of one another. Certainly the holiday parties were a lot more interesting than they are today. that's the way
and I'm glad you're talking about this, because, this show is really, it's targeted to adults who get this, right? This is not a show for, the 21-year-old, not that any 21-year-old who might happen to be listening, I'm dismissing who you are, but the content of this show is really tapping in and talking about the experiences that many of us had. We're in our 40s, we're in our 50s, we have years of experience. We have a sense of context into what life was like, a few decades ago compared to how it is today. And so that environment that you just described, which is very, I think it was very apropos that you use Mad Men to describe it, which was, probably there were relationships that was happening in the firm. There was, whether, they're married or not, and affairs, and the parties were wild and crazy, and there really weren't like these rules. And, you want to talk about that, because that has changed over the years, because that kind of environment made it difficult for some of the people in that environment to feel as though they could have a career that they were able to move up in and thrive in on their own contribution in terms of performance, but that it was tied and connected to, well, this is how things are. If you don't sleep with me, this is not going to happen. And it's removing that kind of element, which is why, it's the laws have changed how behavior has to be conducted in any type of professional workplace, right? Because it's not just law. And you were right, absolutely right about that. It's not just law. In any type of environment like that, a lot of which we've seen kind of stemmed when women went back to work during the Second World War, right? There's no longer just the stay-at-home mom. And so you have this influx of women in the workplace where before that was really not the case. And you were too young, right? You weren't, working in the 1950s and the 1960s, right? So by the time you actually joined the workforce in your 20s, right, this kind of environment existed for a while, and you started your career walking into that type of career, which I'm assuming there was probably smoking aloud in the offices.
Oh yeah, we
right?
had people that smoked in their offices. Absolutely.
Typewriters, the fans, right? Very different.
I'm holding a dictaphone in my hand. This is how it was in the old days. When we started, I say the old days, we didn't have computers on our desk. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have laptops. We had a hard Rolodex on which we would write in longhand the names and phone numbers of our clients. And anything of significance, you would dictate and give to your secretary to transcribe, and you'd get back a hard copy to edit with the red pen. And you'd go through sometimes 4, 5, 6 drafts of a document, whether it was a significant letter or a brief or whatnot, before it was finally ready to go. And so I talk about this a lot in the profession because I think it's important for people to understand. We are so much more efficient today than we were then. And yet we still require the same amount of hours out of people. So they say, pick a number. Let's say we want people to bill 1,800 hours a year. Well, 1,800 hours a year today is what 2,400 or more used to be in the old days, when we didn't have all the ability to do things now, when we weren't emailing back and forth, when we weren't texting, when we weren't able to do Zoom calls, things of that nature. So we have become more productive, more efficient, and as a consequence, we can do a lot more work. I know that's a bit off your question.
Well, it is, but isn't, right? Because what you just described kind of alludes to how the industry has evolved and your role in it, right? Because you're on both sides of this fence of technological evolution in the legal industry, right? So when you started, it was like Mad Men. It was the typewriters. It was the assistants, the secretaries in the short tight skirts and the high heels and the red lips and the cigarettes in the finger, right? And then it was the smooth talking, everyone's in a pinstripe suit. That was a very different environment. And yet over the decades, as things have changed, the technology progressed, right? We're no longer using typewriters and carbon copy, with that smell fresh off the press. Now we're going with, computers and emails, but not just the technology, but now there are more female attorneys, more partners who are female attorneys.
Yes.
Now entering in as well, where because of the social awareness, now we're hiring more minority attorneys, whether it's Black women, Black men, Asian, East Asian, from wherever, and where before it wasn't as prominent. You might have worked at the exception to the rule, the firm, but you've had to change, you've had to adapt. Now you've been able to hold on to part of your identity, which was health, from the time you were a young man still today, right? But did you have to also redefine any part of who you were over the years in order to adapt to this environment that was changing around you as you move through your career?
It's interesting. In perfect candor, I don't think I've had to adapt at all, because my acceptance of the things that you were talking about was always present. I absolutely agree with you that today we are more in big law environment and the profession generally more accepting of women, including those that choose to have alternative career paths, who are not going to take the same path perhaps to partnership that others might, or decide they want to emphasize different things. We're much more accepting of that. We are making conscious efforts to bring more minority attorneys into the profession and giving them opportunities to succeed, which, by the way, they have to do. Because the only way you're going to succeed in this, or frankly in any profession, is by performing. You have to be able to do the job and do it well, or opportunities are simply going to run out. You have to take the opportunity that you're given and run with it and be as good as you possibly can, whether you're practicing medicine or practicing law or an accountant or an investment banker or what have you. We've all got to perform. Now, a lot of this probably strikes you as easy for me to say, being who and what I am in the profession, and somebody that's been in this profession now for 4 decades. And I won't argue with you about that. So one of the responsibilities that I have is to ensure that those that are coming up, those that I'm working with, they're being properly mentored, they're being properly trained, they're given the opportunities to succeed, to perform and thereby succeed. And where I see that they might need some help along the way, boom, let's give them that help. I take the same approach with the athletes that I coach. I've often believed that you have to spend more time, perhaps, with the less skilled or the less prepared than you do with your superstars, because they're ready to go. And sometimes all you have to do is flip the switch and turn them loose. But with the others, you want to bring them along so that we can have them achieve their maximum potential. And if that means that we've got to spend extra time and extra effort on those people, then by God, that's what we're going to do. Because otherwise, what's the point? What good is it to have them there if we're not going to put them to good use?
I just want to make sure that when we're having this discussion, that we're both understanding the same thing. When you say, the mentoring, like, who are you referring to specifically?
Well, I'll give you an example. So I have worked over the course of many years with quite a number of Black female attorneys who have come up through the associate ranks, and they want to do what I have done. They want to be trial lawyers. They want to work in product liability and toxic tort, environmental, and OSHA. Well, that's great, because now I've got people here that want to learn what I learned when I was their age, when I was coming up through the ranks and I was being mentored properly. So now, bingo, I have an opportunity to teach and to mentor and to guide and to give these people the opportunities that I was given. I mean, that's fantastic. That's how we produce what I hope will be an excellent attorney and somebody that the clients can rely on and depend on and want to work with.
And, this is like amazing, being able to use the experience and the years of experience that you've had to help, others who are coming in behind you. When we return from the break, I would like to, for us to kind of delve into, okay, we've spoken about the ones who are coming up now, today, the younger ones. But what is changing is the landscape of attorneys who are not coming up after you, they're at your level. But the landscape of, it's not your level, and it's a lot of, the jock attorneys that you used to work with that primarily surrounded you, but now that landscape has changed, right? And so what does that mean? You're not bringing them up. They're competing with you just as, you're competing for yourself, for the next case, for the next opportunity, for the next promotion, for the next,
Absolutely.
And so, I'd like us to get into that when we return from the break. If you're listening, you just joined us, or you joined in the middle of our juicy conversation. I am sitting here with Kevin Mayer, who is a senior trial attorney at Norton Rose Fulbright, one of my dear friends. So don't go away. We'll be right back after the break. So we're back with Kevin Mayer, my dear friend and senior trial attorney and partner at Norton Rose Fulbright in California. And right before the break, we were talking about how the landscape, how the world has changed around him in the legal industry, having started off when it was this Mad Men type environment where pretty much anything went, different environment to where it's changed today. It's a little bit more diverse. There's a little bit more rules and structures around how behaviors have to be in the workplace. And so, Kevin, you were talking about the fact that you use your years of experience to bring up or to coach or advise or to mentor younger attorneys who, in the broader scheme, it's a more diverse group of attorneys than it was, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. But let's change course for a second. And let's talk about the attorneys you're not mentoring, the attorneys who are your peers, because the changes, you've been in the industry for so long now, almost 40 years, and this push for diversity, this push for broadening the landscape and bringing in, opening the doors so that there's a more equity in access to opportunities to being a senior partner, a trial attorney at some of these big name firms. And what I'd like to know, and I'm very curious, like, how has that affected your ability? Because not your ability, I'm sorry, that's not going to affect your ability. And I want to make sure that I'm articulating this in a way that actually makes sense, which is the pool of attorneys as you've gotten older, right? Where it was very more homogenous before, that's opened the door for more increased number of qualified attorneys to the pool that already existed, right? And that means that there are more people that now can vie for the next promotion, for the next opportunity, the next big case. And how has that affected you? Because it went from being this small 200, 300, which used to be big back 40 years ago, to thousands, right? How do you remain competitive?
Well, in some respects, it's actually enhanced opportunities for me and those of my generation, because we are now with firms that literally can do anything anywhere in the world. I'll give you an example. I mean, my history as a trial attorney has been in certain areas, but I now find that I'm expanding into becoming a plaintiff's commercial disputes attorney. I'm working on several matters right now that are completely different from anything.
Can you explain that to those of us who are not like savvy in the different types of, you have to kind of break it down.
So obviously in the civil system, we have plaintiffs who are those that bring the claims, those who claim that they were wronged in some way, whether it's a tort or a contract or some commercial transaction that went awry, what have you. And then the defendants, which are usually the individuals, the companies who are being sued and are going to defend themselves against these claims. So I've always been, by and large, on the defense side of companies that are product manufacturers, whether it's industrial products, chemical products, defending employers for environmental health and safety issues, OSHA violations, and what have you. And now I find that I'm branching off into commercial disputes, business to business problems, be it interference with prospective economic advantage, commercial fraud, antitrust, things of that nature, breach of contract. So I'm now expanding my vistas, if you will, but bringing to the table the same skill set that I've had and developed over the course of time, which is somebody that has the ability to go into the courtroom and talk to judges and juries and try to prove my case. So from that perspective, as the profession has changed, those like me have to change with it. We are constantly having to reinvent ourselves in order to meet the needs of the moment. We have a saying in this profession that the client's needs must be served. And it's absolutely true, because what your client's needs were yesterday or 10 years ago may not be the same needs that they have today, and certainly not 3 years from now. So we constantly have to adapt and change and overcome and deal with the issues that our clients bring to us to have handled. The reason that they need lawyers is because they have a legal problem that requires a solution. And you can't just be the little round peg that refuses to be pounded into the square hole, the triangular hole, the octagonal hole, et cetera, and say, I'm just a round peg. That's all I do. Because as you go on in this profession, you find out that you have to be many different things at many different times to many different people. And so I'm certainly an example of that. I know plenty of other attorneys who have been in the practice as long or longer than I have that have constantly had to reinvent themselves over the course of time to meet the demands of the client community.
Well, I would like to break that down and unpack that a little. And I want to bring it down to really that personal, individual change that you have had to experience in terms of having to reinvent yourself, redefine what you bring to the table as an attorney, as a trial attorney, and meeting the needs of the client. And what does that mean? And I ask does that mean because over the years, the clients, and just as you just said, it's changed, it's evolved. And so you are trying to adapt, or not trying to, you are adapting in order to be able to provide service, to add value, to help your client solve whatever legal problem that it is that they are going through. And here you are, you've been practicing law for 38 years. And for many, many years, you were known as, and still are today. I don't think that has changed. That when it comes to OSHA, when it comes to health issues, when it comes to tort, product liability, you are the guy. You are the guy. But now, today, we have a lot of tech companies, right? Where maybe because everything's virtual, there's not a whole lot of occupational health and safety. I don't know. I'm not an attorney, but I'm just guessing that because you're not in a building.
Oh, you'd be surprised.
Right? You're working, all your employees are working from home. That, not saying that there isn't going to be the opportunities for litigation. It's just that because of the changing landscape of how technology has redefined what work means and how it's conducted, that there has been, I'm going to make an assumption here, a decrease in certain types of litigation because of it, something not out of your control. So now you're redefining yourself as, or adapting and changing what you've been known for into something that's a little bit more nuanced, a little bit different from what you've practiced over for the last almost 40 years. And is there any moment when you're branching into these areas where, I know in law, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you're doing, the plaintiff defense where you didn't have the history of being the guy for that how do you approach that? How do you turn yourself into that person's like, look, I'm going to do this. I'm going to add value. I am able to do this for you, my client, and you can trust me. And this is how do you show up for that when you're redefining yourself into areas that you didn't have the history in before?
One of the great things about the profession of law, and particularly when you're a trial attorney, is you are constantly learning. You're learning about your client, you're learning about their business, you're learning about their products, you're learning about their approach to things, you're learning about what they want to accomplish in the world and how you can help them get there, how you can advance the ball for them, whether it's as a litigator or in trial or in commercial negotiations or in contract drafting or whatnot. So we're constantly learning about things. When I started in practice, I was doing a lot of construction defect litigation in residential housing, whether it was condominium conversions or single family homes or something like that. And then I started doing architect and engineer malpractice cases. And then one day we brought in this lateral partner from another firm who had a toxic tort practice. Now, I had avoided the hard sciences in college like the plague. I mean, I was a scientist, but I was a political scientist. And so I knew nothing about the hard sciences, about medicine or anything else. And yet I then became this partner's associate. And I learned from the ground up an area that I had absolutely no background or education in. And over the course of time, became knowledgeable in that, to the point where people say, well, he's not a doctor, but he plays one in the courtroom.
Can we just explain?
Yeah.
I just don't, what tort litigation is, just
Sure.
in layman's terms.
So tort litigation is when somebody commits a civil wrong. We have two basic parts of our legal system. We have the civil system and we have the criminal system. So tort are civil wrongs as opposed to criminal wrongs, although sometimes they could be both. So something like an assault and battery, that can be a criminal charge, but can also be a civil cause of action. Negligence, somebody has behaved in a way that fell beneath the standard of care and caused you injury. Strict products liability, a product has an alleged manufacturing or design or warning defect which somebody who was hurt claims was responsible for causing their injury, breach of warranties, fraudulent concealment and misrepresentation that caused you to do something that you would not have otherwise done had you been aware of the true facts. So in our civil system, we allow plaintiffs who claim they have been wronged to sue in tort those individuals or entities that they claim caused that harm to them and are going to be asked to respond to them in damages, which usually means the payment of money to compensate them for their injuries.
Okay. And so you've had to learn. You're the consummate student. And would you say that holds true today?
Oh, absolutely. I have to learn things all the time. At a prior firm, I got involved for the very first time in some medical device mass tort litigation. So we had thousands of plaintiffs' cases being filed against our client all over the country, claiming that a particular medical device had caused them injury or was likely to cause them injury in the future, even if it hadn't so far. It was an implantable device. And so I had to learn about the field of medical devices. How does the FDA review and approve these things to be used? How are they developed? What goes into the design and the surveillance and the monitoring and the creation of warning materials? How are doctors trained in how to implant this? What warnings are given to the patients about how these devices could act or interact in their body? What are the potential risks associated with these things? And then, of course, in each of the individual cases, did the device fail in some way? Was it defective? Did it actually cause injury? Is this person really hurt such that they should be compensated? Or is there something else going on in their lives, in their medical history that explains what's going on and it has nothing to do with the device whatsoever? So that was a completely new area that I had to learn. Things that I'm involved in now, I'm learning about antitrust. I'm learning about cybersecurity. I'm learning about various complicated commercial transactions that I previously hadn't been involved in. Well, these are all things that I have to know if I'm going to go into the courtroom and be an effective advocate for our clients' interests, particularly if I'm going to go into trial and have to argue to a jury and put on evidence through witnesses and through documents and other forms of evidence, the things that I think we need to prove our case so that I can argue to the jury that our client should win this dispute.
That was spoken like a true attorney. So I think what our listeners may get from this is that you can hear how he would be in court, right? If you're actually delivering an explanation to a jury, because the average juror in the United States has an education of an 8th grade education. So anything you have to explain needs to be brought down to that level, very articulate in a way where you're not condescending. And you can hear that Kevin's very, very articulate in conveying what he's had to learn. And so here you are, you're sitting, it's been almost 4 decades. You show no sign of slowing down, none, zip. Your approach to your profession is the same that you take to your approach to your fitness, which is the same that you take to your approach to being a dad and being a hockey coach, which, look, I got to tell you, Kevin, right? I'm from the Caribbean. I'm from Trinidad. I didn't come to the US until I was in my 20s. Oh, not in my 20s. I was actually 20 when I came here. And ice hockey was just not something I ever watched, never saw it, knew nothing about it, right? Because in the Caribbean, it's all warm. Nobody's on the ice. There is no ice, right? You're lucky to have ice because darn thing will melt. And when I first saw a hockey game, I actually went to when I was invited to it. I'm like, hockey, I've never been. I'll just go. And my thought was, these people are choosing to play this game. They're literally, banging up against the barriers of the rink. And, it seems so just as violent, and I call it violent, right? Meaning the risk to get hurt as a rugby game or football, or even worse, because you've got sharp skates on. And unlike football, you have a huge stick that could break some bones. And so this is not a sport for the timid. And here you are today, right? When was the last time you were at the rink?
Well, I was just at a rink yesterday,
Right.
albeit with my
At
daughter.
62, exactly, right? So you have kids who are involved in ice sports. Your son's involved in hockey, one's in lacrosse, or is it like three of them in hockey? I'm not sure
Well,
what.
all three boys were hockey players. They all played for the Los Angeles Kings High School League. I have one that is still playing now. The other two are in college. Two of my boys are lacrosse players, and my daughter, as you know, is a figure skater. So all of them are on the ice, and
And you're
that's how
like
I
on
got
the ice
involved
with
in
them,
coaching.
right?
Right. That's
You're
right.
like on the ice with them. And so, the life you're living, the fullness of it, the fact that you're educating yourself in order to provide value to your client, and the fact that you don't think twice about the fact that you coach and you're involved in a sport that is a high contact sport, and as a coach, and the kind of physical energy and drive it takes to say, I'm getting up and I'm going to do this today and tomorrow, and you don't think like, you should stop because I'm 60, like.
Well, no, because it's who I am. And if we learn anything in life, and I think as we go through life and we acquire experience and wisdom, which just comes by virtue of being alive, you have to become more comfortable with yourself. When you're younger, you tend to want to adopt various personalities depending on the circumstances, or at least you try on various personalities to see what works and what doesn't. But at the end of the day, you have to be true to yourself. You have to decide, this doesn't really work for me very well. This is really what I am and who I am, and this is what motivates me, and this is what makes me happy, or at least content with myself. And that's the direction that you need to go in. That's what you need to accept and adopt. And I would tell anybody, particularly a younger person in the profession, be yourself. Don't try to be somebody else. Don't try to imitate or emulate somebody else, because it won't be you. And we'll see through that very quickly. I learned that as a trial attorney in the courtroom. Yes, I can borrow things that I've learned from other attorneys, but I can't be them, and I don't want to be them. I want to be me, because jurors are very intuitive people. When you do a long cause case and you're with them every day, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week for several weeks, couple months, they're going to know an awful lot about you just by virtue of you walking in there and being with them every day. They're going to watch everything you do, whether your shoes are shined, whether your tie is straight, whether your suit is clean. And you really have to establish credibility with those people. Well, how do we establish that credibility? We establish it by being genuine and authentic and be ourselves. Because if we're not, they're going to figure it out eventually. And then guess what? They won't trust you. And once you lose that trust, 9 times out of 10 or more, you are going to lose the case, because the jury can't believe what you're telling them, or at least they're not going to accept it wholeheartedly.
Then what is your opinion on that requirement to be yourself, or in the authenticity of being yourself, when that comes up against, I am myself, but part of who I have identified myself to be is no longer as adding value to the greater community, the greater good, because maybe I'm not relevant anymore. Or not, well, and I say and it's a story, right? It's not that the person is not relevant, but there is this connection to the identity of the person and what is done to add value to other people, because the two are not necessarily one and the same. And what you do to add value can always be redefined and changed, which is in your case, even though you are an attorney, the way you add value as an attorney today has been redefined, because you've had to learn new areas of law. You've had to learn a new way of adding value in order to stay relevant without losing who you are as a person, who Kevin Mayer is, that identity, this guy who wakes up at 4:45 in the morning so that he can go walk his dogs, take care of his family, do his job, and add value to his client and evolve over the years. And I think that's the question. How do you evolve? How do you hold on to who you are as a person while at the same time changing or redefining or rediscovering what it is you have to offer the greater society around you?
It's such a great question, Janelle. I don't know if you remember this song by Led Zeppelin called When the Levee Breaks. If you don't remember it, I would encourage you and your listeners to go listen to that tonight.
Should I have you sing it? Can you sing it for us and add that to one of your skills as who you are?
Not right now.
Why not? Come on. I think we'd find
my
value
voice
in
is
it
not
or the
where it
one
needs to
verse.
be.
We don't need
I couldn't
perfection.
hold a candle to Robert Plant.
Well, Kevin,
for that song.
you don't want to be Robert Plant. You just said it. You wouldn't want to be anybody else.
But if I'm going to do justice to the
way.
song that he sang, got to have the voice for it. But my point is, there's a lyric in there that perfectly encapsulates what we're talking about here, and that's crying won't help you, crying won't do you no good. And the point is, when we're talking about our continued relevance in this society, you can't sit there and bemoan your current circumstances, because what good is that going to do? It's not going to do you any good. So you have to seize the opportunity, learn from it, and figure out how to turn it around to your advantage. Does that mean you may need to go someplace else and do something else? Yes, it does sometimes. Or it means that you need to seek out some assistance from those that you can trust, who have your best interests at heart, who are going to give you some good straight news that sometimes you need to hear. But what we can't do is sit static and expect the world to change just because we want it to. We have to create our own opportunities. This isn't like the old days. We used to joke about this in the law, that in the old days, the partner would go out to lunch with the claims adjuster from the insurance carrier, have a couple martinis, and come back with 3 new files, and he'd just walk into the associate's office and drop them on the desk. Bingo, here's 3 new cases, get to work. It doesn't work that way anymore. You can't wait for the phone to ring. You can't wait to get an email from a client you haven't heard from in a long time. You have to go out and create your own opportunities. And yes, there's a lot of luck involved, but there's also a lot of elbow grease involved. You simply have to get down to it and create opportunities for yourself. And if you find that something isn't working, then turn around and do something else and see if you can make that work. But we've all got to get up every day and put one foot in front of the other and keep hauling, keep chopping wood. You've heard me say this before when you and I have had this kind of a conversation. You've got to get up and chop wood, because if you don't chop wood, you're not going to have a fire to burn.
Yes, you've said this many times. I'm like, in the Caribbean, we don't chop wood because we don't need, firewood, because, it's hot. We have the sun. I'm just kidding. But luck, what people call luck, what many think luck is, there's actually a formula for it. And the formula is, luck is when opportunity meets preparation. And meaning that if you're learning and you're constantly, investing in your own self, in your own personal development, in this case for you, you had to learn, different types of litigation, right, on the plaintiff side, where for years you've been on the defense side, and there's some nuances that's just going to be different, and you've had to learn. And so the opportunity came, the luck came when, your preparation, your investment in yourself meant the opportunity to actually help someone, and boom, you're the right person for it. You just happen to be maybe at the right place at the right time. But if you weren't someone already prepared to be able to take it on, you wouldn't have had that opportunity. That people might just think is lucky. And I work with a lot of clients. I work, I mentor other attorneys who are not employees. They own their own firms. And I sit with them and I work with them in terms of, a lot of complaints. It's like, I want to add value, but I'm not getting these clients. I want the phone to ring and the phone's not ringing. And I have to advise and coach and say, your phone is not just gonna ring because you're hoping it's gonna ring and you put a plaque up on your door that has ESQ behind your name, right? You have to invest in yourself in terms of understanding, well, who's your client? You have to go out there, learn who you're going to be serving, very niche because you can't serve everyone. And you have to put the work into getting to know where they are and putting yourself there. Put yourself where they are. Find out where this ideal client spends their time and their money. And when you know that, you go out there because the phone's not just going to ring on its own. There is some effort that's required. And then luck will happen where, because you've been prepared, because you've been ready for this, when the opportunity shows up, you've got it. Right?
It's interesting. There is a book that I highly recommend to people on the issue of business development, and it's called The Click Moment. And it's a small book, it's the kind of thing you can read on an airplane, which is a perfect way to spend the flight. And the book stands for the proposition that every great innovation in human history over the last 2 centuries, perhaps even more, has not come because of a business plan, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. It's come by 2 people or 3 people being in the right place at the right time in the right circumstance with an idea. And often they just met purely by chance. So when I do the business development lectures in this firm or my former firms for the associates and the young attorneys, I always started with this idea. Now, how many starting quarterbacks are there in the NFL? And they'll think, and then, somebody will say 32. And I say, well, are you counting the New York Jets? And everybody will laugh. And I say, okay, 32. Now, how many attorneys are there? Guess what? You're not that special. You are one of thousands of people just like you. Went to a college, graduated, went on to law school, did well, graduated, passed the bar exam. Now here you are, a member of the profession. What are you going to do to distinguish yourself from the thousands of other young attorneys just like you who want to do the same kind of work, have the same kind of clients, have the same kind of success that you want? What are you going to do to distinguish yourself? And the name of the game is you got to put yourself out there and make yourself available and put yourself in situations where you're going to meet people. We have a saying in the profession, and when we talk about business development, that if you're successful 5% of the time, 1 out of 20 opportunities, that's pretty good. I can't think of any other endeavor where that would be considered acceptable. If you're a Major League Baseball player and you only hit 1 out of 20, you're going to the minors. If you only complete 1 of 20 passes in the NFL, you're on the bench. But in the law, if we can be successful 1 out of 20 times in our business development efforts, that's a pretty good success rate. You can do a lot of good that way. You can generate a lot of work that way.
And we can take this lesson and have it. It's not applicable just for law, right? Everyone is special in their own right? But we have to redefine who we are to stand apart from everyone else. And when we face these doubts and these fears about what our abilities are as we get older, that we don't hang our ability to do more, to do better on a number of how old we are. That conversation that you have with those aspiring attorneys isn't any different from someone who's 40 or 50. It's, are you looking at your ability to achieve anything personally, professionally, spiritually, emotionally, based on how long you've been on this planet? Which I think it's a misguided story that we tell ourselves. That we listen to this collective that once you're over 40, if you haven't accomplished what you want to accomplish, it's too late, which isn't true.
You're so right, Janelle. I think what's happened to a lot of people is they were used to having things sail along for them for years, if not decades. And then all of a sudden, they ran into a wall for whatever reason. The typical things that have happened to me in the past is I might have had in-house attorneys at various companies that I was working for years and years and years. And then they retired. And they were replaced by new in-house attorneys who didn't know me, had no particular loyalty to me or my law firm because we hadn't worked together before. And by the way, they had their own favorites. They had people that they had come up with in the profession. Maybe they came out of a law firm into that in-house position, and now they're going to give the work to their friends in the law firm that they just left. That happens an awful lot. So what are you going to do? Well, we could sit there and bemoan that. But as I say, crying don't help you. Crying won't do you no good. So we have to go out and create new opportunities. We have to go out and meet new people. We have to broaden our horizons. And it can be a difficult thing for older attorneys or older people in any profession who are used to having things a certain way, and they've just gotten comfortable. And when you get comfortable, you can get lazy because this is how it's always been. Why should I change? I haven't had to change before. Why should I have to change now? Well, you have to change now because you have to change now. And people need to get their mind wrapped around that.
This is, the greatest example of not wanting to change because, okay, I've done this thing. This is just how things are done. It's Blockbuster. And Blockbuster's view on Netflix when Netflix first came out, for those of you listening, we all remember, right? We'd go to Blockbuster and pick out the VHS, the movie for the weekend, and then you'd put it in and you'd have to remember to rewind it before you brought it back to, the store. So hopefully anyone who's like 30 and listening, you're like, what are you talking about? But, Blockbuster was the largest, they dominated the industry in terms of at-home entertainment with video. And here comes along this small little fledgling company who's like, you know what? We are going to mail the DVDs in a little envelope. We're not even going to put it in the little plastic case that you get it if you go to Dave & Buster's. It's going to be this little cheap envelope, and we're going to mail it to you. You don't even have to leave your house. Blockbuster did not think that was serious. They didn't take them seriously, and they didn't change, and they didn't evolve, and they didn't try to compete. Now, if I'm not mistaken, I think there's only one Blockbuster store that's in existence today. One.
I think that's right.
And where is Netflix? A global giant, right?
Well, they're on everybody's TV.
Exactly. Everyone, right? Global giant. And so that may be a company, but I think that as humans, as individuals, right, there's this disconnect that a company is separate from a human. No, companies are run by people. The official company is a piece of paper, but the paper is not making decisions, right? The paper is not, where the company is incorporated on and the official seals, that's filed away somewhere doing nothing. It's the people in the company that are redefining what should be done and how things should progress. And individually, we should always be doing that, because if you're not growing, if you're not investing in yourself, if you're not evolving, you're dying. So you can reach a certain age, and if you're like, I'm not going to do anything else, you're just waiting to die. You're just like, you know what? I'm just going to sit here and let the years tick by until it's my time to go 6 feet under and let the grass grow above me.
And by the way, that time will arrive a lot sooner.
It would.
In that circumstance than it would otherwise.
There is no purpose. I had, I created one of my videos on TikTok that went viral, and, telling my story. I went back to school over 40, right? I was 40 when I decided to go back to grad school, right? Went to Cornell, blah, blah, blah. And someone made a comment on my video and asking, the comment that she made was, I'm 55, that's just too old. You just don't get it. And I responded to her video with a video of my own saying, I have no idea what you mean by too old. Like, if that's too old for you, then that is your truth. But my perspective is, I had at the time a grandmother who went to Israel when she was 75 years old because she always wanted to ride a camel in Israel. And so she went at the ripe age of 75 to ride a camel. And when she turned 100, she was saying, oh my Lord, one of the best experiences I had was 25 years ago when I rode a camel. My father was not able to finish his degree when he was a young man. And he decided at the age of 60 to go and get his bachelor's. And he graduated with his bachelor's at the age of 64. So when this woman is writing me and saying, I'm 55 and I'm too old and I just don't get it, I'm like, I cannot relate to that, because I have experiences or I have examples in my life that completely refutes what you're saying, that 55 is too old.
Right. But the other thing that you've had as well, Janelle, and this is where somebody like you adds value, tremendous value to that one, is you have also been fortunate that you've had people around you who have encouraged you and motivated you and supported you. I'm not talking about financially, I'm talking about emotionally, basically bucking you up and helping to convince you of what you already knew to be true, but sometimes didn't want to admit was true. And those are the pushes that we all need. We all need people behind us and next to us who are going to support us and push us in the right direction and convince us of what we know deep down to be true, but sometimes want to take the easy way out and say, I'm not so sure. And this is where we add value for one another. Yes. You know, the things that you're doing now for the attorneys that you are advising is absolutely invaluable, because if not you, where else are they going to get this? They need to have that. We all need to have that. We all need to have people that are pulling on the oar with us in the same direction. Or if they're not able to pull on it, at least tell us how to pull on it in the right way, so that we have the ability to take our God-given talents and put them to the best use.
That's a very eloquent way of explaining that old adage, right? Birds of a feather flock together, or show me your friends, I'll show you who you are. And you're absolutely right. Who you're surrounded by will also influence decisions that you're making in terms of moving forward and growing and reinventing yourself. Because if where you are, you're surrounded by naysayers and people who are not supporting you, you're not going to grow. And personally, that was my truth for many years, which is why I think I've grown so much in the last few. But you're right, because now, as compared to, 6 years ago, 5 years, not 5 years ago, 6 years, 7 years, 10 years ago, that who I was surrounded by weren't bad people. They just weren't people who were as invested in seeing me grow, because they themselves weren't growing. And we all stayed at one place and never grew. And then once I changed who I was surrounded by, not saying that I stopped just talking to all my friends, but what I did was make a conscious decision to say, I want to grow, I want to learn, I want to improve. And now, the fact that I'm sitting here and having this conversation with you, the fact that I was able to meet you in the first place, I can trace this back to the decision to say, you know what? I want different, I want better, and then decided to go back to school. And that changed the whole trajectory of everything that I've accomplished in quite, the last few years since I graduated, and during class as well, where I am now surrounded by people I look up to, that I admire, where I am not the smartest person, I am not the most driven person, I am not the most accomplished person. I am surrounded by such people, which now elevates my game. And right. I don't see
why? Because we're not going to let you off the hook.
No, right? You're holding me to task, right?
That's right.
And so I cannot. And for anyone who's listening, I want to paint this picture, right? Kevin is 72, and I'm like, I am still strong. He is goals when it comes to health, right? And here he is redefining himself. He's still going with more vitality, more drive, more ambition than the average person in America. And he's in my circle. I have no choice, none actually, but to be inspired and to feel motivated. And, many of the guests who are going to be coming, on this show, they're all people who are in that I know personally, who inspire me. And if there's anything that we can leave for you today, if you're listening to this show, is if you're thinking you're too old, the age is just a number, or that you can't redefine who you are, or you can't learn something new without losing who you are as a person, then who are you surrounded by? And if you cannot be in the presence of the people who you are you can look up to and admire and learn from. There's so many other ways. One of them, listen to the show every week, every Sunday, because you're going to be some amazing people on here. But you can find books, you can find webinars, you can find seminars, you can find content that is written and meant for you to hear, to listen, to grow from. There's so many authors out there, some alive, some have passed on, who have departed or who have shared, imparted words of knowledge, encouragement, and new perspectives. The book that Kevin mentioned, The Click Moment, that's a great book. Go out on Amazon, go buy the book. If you can't read it because you don't have time, download it, get the audio book. Listen to it in the car, listen to it in the morning when you're getting dressed in the morning. There are so many ways that you can find to improve or redefine the goals you're trying to reach and get there. You don't have to do it on your own, but if you're not inspired by anyone in your circle, then the problem isn't your age. The problem isn't your age.
Nope. The problem is your attitude and your mindset. And those need a good adjustment.
Right? Like a chiropractor. Kevin, I appreciate your spending your time with me tonight on the show. And I am grateful for opening up, conversing with me, and hopefully, from the conversation that we've had tonight, that someone who's listening could have taken something that you've said and say, okay, I get it. I can apply it to my life.
Absolutely. It's been a real privilege to be here and have the opportunity to chat with you about these things because I believe very strongly in them. So thank you for allowing me that opportunity.
The conversation with Kevin Mayer was one that was extremely, extremely engaging and insightful. When you're looking at someone who has had a career that spanned 38 years, in the legal industry, and how he's had to redefine how he's delivered, the law, and what his identity is. That you look at him at 62 and he is fit, he is healthy, he is driven, he wakes up at 4:45 and, he's able to go, and there isn't anything in his mind that he couldn't do. And if you enjoyed or got value from listening to this conversation, some things to remember. Your age does not determine what you're able to accomplish, does not determine how far you're able to go, or if you can change whatever you're doing now and do something else, right? You want to find yourself in spaces where you can be mentored, whether that's finding the people and speaking with them in terms of people you admire and who are doing what you would like to now start doing, whether it's finding an audio or a book or a seminar or online, a webinar. But whatever it is, you want to put yourself in a space where you can learn and invest in yourself and in your personal development. If you found value in this show, you can listen to it again on Spotify and on YouTube and on my website at janellesam.com. New episodes air every Sunday night at 7 p.m. Central on www.allrealradio.com. If you know someone who could benefit from these conversations, encourage them to tune in on Sunday nights, or share the audio or send them to YouTube so that they can see these videos. Thank you for spending and sharing your time with me on this show, and I look forward to sharing the next one with you next week. Thank you.